Well, hello, Gary. Thank you for joining us again. Um,
Absolutely.
we have been talking about various topics of interest that I think would be interesting to some of the clients that I have, not necessarily related to court stuff or litigation or anything
Mhm.
like that, but just a broader understanding of what life is about and what life really is. Now, for those who have not heard the podcast before, Dr. Gary Howard um, has his graduate and undergraduate he did it undergraduate and graduate work at Harvard. He got his doctorate. I'm going to give you an opportunity to correct
Okay.
that at Carnegie Mellon. So why don't you? I keep on getting that wrong. Next time, I'm just going to have you introduce yourself.
Well, PhD at Carnegie Mellon and postdoctoral fellowships at Harvard and Johns Hopkins.
John Hopkins. That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. So Gary has retired now, and in his spare time, when he's not pursuing um, other pursuits, like he's on the Castro Valley School Board, and he's a Rotarian. He does a lot of things, tries to remain as active as he possibly can. He writes a lot of books, and books that I find of particular interest. I mean, he's written, for instance, a book on the biology of death. That is something that we all need to not try to shy away from, those kinds of topics. But the biology part of it was really interesting. We've also had discussions on previous podcasts as to how the brain functions, whether plants and other species and other organisms may have a consciousness, whether we can use the functioning of the brain to predict how people may behave in future. Whether some people may be more susceptible to becoming uh, victims or perpetrators of domestic abuse, for instance.
Mhm.
So we've had a lot of interesting discussion. Now, Gary has come up with a new book, and it has to do with biology again. But from my understanding, and I haven't read the book yet because I'm waiting for Gary to drop off my free copy, and he can sign it for me. Basically, the book, from what I can understand, is dealing with how we should not look at biology objectively, that we should look at it as an integral part of our own being. Again, that may be a very loose definition of what I understand it to be. So I'm going to stop talking and then just have you take over, Gary, and tell me what I got wrong.
Well, that's not a bad interpretation of it. The title of the book is The Biology of Us. And by that, I mean to look in a more human-centric way at biology. And because in our ordinary lives, like right now, where it's a little cool and a little rainy outside, maybe, we're insulated from it. We live in a house, we have fairly good clothing, we don't have to uh, work hard for our food or anything like that. Our hunter-gatherer ancestors had to struggle to find enough food to survive. We hunt for bargains at Safeway and gather up what we want. Our only real interactions with wildlife are maybe swatting a mosquito at a picnic or something. But a guy that I admire a great deal, E.O. Wilson, a Harvard biologist, wrote a book called Biophilia. He sort of invented the term, and he describes that as the fact that we have an inherent uh, desire to be around other living organisms. We like to go to the park or the forest, have plants around us, um, have pets, and so forth. And social psychologists and environmental psychologists have done many studies to show that that kind of interaction with trees and plants reduces stress, reduces blood pressure, reduces stress hormones. So it's really good to be aware, even though we're protected from this life, it's all around us. And I think in a better appreciation, a better awareness of the biology might do us all some good. And so the book describes life around us, on us, and in us. So there are lots of things to see around us for a lot of amazing organisms. David Attenborough and many other movie makers, TV producers, and so forth have made some really beautiful films and TV shows that are educational and even inspiring. They show us all about life in various places, but they tend to talk about life in Patagonia or the Kalahari or Antarctica. And almost subconsciously, they uh, imply or might leave us with the subtle impression that life is someplace else. Biology is over there in exotic worlds with exotic animals. And I would like to make the point, hopefully, that there are exotic plants and animals all around us every day. We just don't see them. For example, right now, if you go out, there are a lot of places where I'm sure you can find uh, mud puddles and ponds and little still bodies of water that are full of green living things. We might call it pond scum. Pond scum, though, uh, actually, we owe a lot to it. It's this ordinary stuff. Every year, Lake Chabot gets filled up with cyanobacteria that occasionally are toxic. They warn us, don't let your dog drink the water in the lake. It's poisonous. It turns out that those same cyanobacteria, uh, a couple of billion years ago, changed the atmosphere around all of us. Before they started that, there was no oxygen in our atmosphere. It was all what was called a reducing atmosphere with methane and various sulfur compounds and carbon dioxide and such. Uh, we couldn't survive there now. But this pond scum worked for hundreds of millions of years and produced all this oxygen that we now breathe. So every time you walk by those green little ponds, you should say thank you to the pond scum. Another place where you can really find a lot of life, I think, is in the supermarket. This is an odd place, maybe, at first thought. But if you think about you walk through the produce section, there's a whole, quite often, very beautiful array of leaves, stems, roots, mushrooms, nuts, berries, all kinds of things. Very beautiful. They are all living organisms, living plants and fungi that are around us. And they're around us because we walk into the supermarket fairly often. Uh, Anybody who is, we're approaching Thanksgiving, I should say. Turkey's a popular item on the Thanksgiving menu. And anybody who's cooked a turkey has reached into that body cavity and pulled out the heart, the crop, the liver, the neck. So the great thing about supermarkets is that you can not only see a lot of organisms, you can actually take them home. And if you're really interested, you can learn a lot about anatomy and physiology. Uh, there are also a lot of organisms on us and in us. We think of ourselves as individuals, but we're a collection of about 30 trillion cells, okay? And there is an equal number, maybe a bit more, of other organisms that are, you might call fellow travelers, that are on us and in us. The microbiome has got a lot of press lately, the bacterial content of our intestines, which we depend on to start the digestion of our food. There are millions of those. So we're this quite a collection of organisms, bacteria, fungi, small microscopic other creatures. And of course, there are viruses. I think we've all just had a bout with COVID occasionally. Uh, I'm actually going to go get my vaccine in a couple of hours, another one. But, we have a lot of viruses that hang about in us. And even then, they leave back what some people call fossils. The DNA of the virus is sometimes incorporated into our own genome, the genome being the collection of all our genes. Uh, the actual DNA coding proteins only make up a small portion, maybe a quarter of our genome. But another 9%, roughly 9 or 10% of all our DNA is old virus DNAs that we've collected over these millions of years. And they're used as sort of a spare parts yard. Occasionally, a fragment, a sequence of DNA will be recycled and put to another use. A very famous one is a protein called ARC, ARC. And ARC is a small protein, and it's extremely important in studies with mice, for example. The mice can learn if they don't have ARC, but they can't remember. So their short-term memory can't be translated into long-term memory. So you have to reteach them over and over again. We also have ARC, and it's important for our memory, but it's actually a viral fossil, an old virus sequence. The other aspect about biology that's around us all the time is quite literally us, our body. We are biological organisms. We may not think about it all that time, except at birth, death, injury, serious illness. Those are reminders. The pandemic was certainly a reminder. But every day we're still a biological organism, and we can see a lot of biology and evolution right in ourselves. The very act of standing up is one I like to cite. To stand up here, I have to use bones for support, muscles to move the bones, nerves to innervate the muscles and cause them to contract. I need a blood system to supply oxygen and nutrients to those muscles. I need blood pressure to force that blood up into my brain, which coordinates everything. I also need the balance mechanisms in my inner ear. All of these things have to work together, and all of those systems had to evolve over time. For example, when I say we, meaning all organisms, crawled out of the water back about 500 or 600 million years ago to invade the land, that's a very different environment than being in the water. In the water, organisms can take advantage of the buoyancy that they have. Uh, they, Many water plants have little air sacs that let them buoy themselves up to where they're closer to the surface and can get more sunlight. Fish have swim bladders to give them buoyancy. When you come out of the water, it's a whole different world. So trees and plants needed to figure out ways to stand up so they can reach more sunlight. So they evolved lignin and cellulose and other structural molecules. We developed bones, an internal bone system. Other organisms use an external bone system. But all of us had to evolve. So even just thinking about standing up is a good way to think back about we at some point had to evolve all of those. At some point, we had to come down out of the trees and develop from walking on four legs to becoming bipedal or walking on two legs. And even that is a huge step in evolution. And there was a penalty for that. Uh, Hip problems, feet problems, ankle problems, back problems, birth problems for women, And all of those were results of evolution, which gave us certain advantages. Bipedalism was a huge step forward, but it was not without cost. So the idea of this book, The Biology of Us, is to raise that awareness, bioawareness, so that I think we can more fully appreciate that we're part of nature, that evolution is still continuing. We can't get out of the game. We can insulate ourselves, but we can't get out of the game. So, what do you think, Bernie?
Well, I have a question. When
Okay.
I crawl out of, when I crawl out of, not out of the water, but when I crawl out of bed in the morning, after I finished, after I finished reading your book, and I swing my legs off the bed, and I'm now going to start my day. What is the biggest takeaways from your book that you want me to take with me during my average day?
I think it's just to open our eyes and to look at what's around us.
Mhm.
You know, all I'm looking at, if I look out my window here and see the trees and bushes and so forth in my yard, all of those things are actually related to us. Every one of us we use the same DNA, we use the same energy systems. Well, if we go back far enough, they are a millionth cousin, a billion times removed or whatever. But just an idea that they are there and that we're all in this together, which is really important now because if you think about it, we're in a climate crisis now. All of us so far have survived. More species have died out than exist, and there are a lot of them exist still. But we've survived the 3.5 billion years that life has been on Earth, and there were even five what were called mass extinctions when 90 or 95% of all living organisms died on Earth. We survived all those so far. There's an unbroken link all the way back. But in climate crisis, we may be heading into a sixth mass extinction, and that could have serious implications for us. In
So,
India now, I mean, India's a bad I'm sorry to pick on India, but you know, it is a part of the world that gets very hot in the middle of India, and the temperatures there during the day in the summers are up in the 120. And you know, we're approaching where, I mean, humans can't really survive much more than that, maybe 130 or so, but that's going to cause a lot of trouble.
so Gary, I always like to try to ask questions that
I know,
you may not be able to answer. So,
for sure.
um, you kind of eloquently described how we evolved to meet, and and all the organisms evolved to meet uh, new challenges. Some succeed, and as you say, some fail, as that 95% of the organisms. What is the scientific causation for an organism to try to improve itself, to evolve to the next step, to survive? What is the,
This is sort of
is
conceptually
it,
a hard thing to accept. It's
mhm,
randomness. And the randomness comes from the fact that the replication of the genes is not 100% accurate. And sometimes mistakes are made. A certain number of mistakes is a good thing. It allows for change and adaptation to new
mhm,
environmental conditions. But if a mutation occurs and it gives an advantage, that organism survives better and then can reproduce more. If the mutation is detrimental, it could even be lethal, but it might make the organism weaker, thus not able to compete so well. And over time, they're out. Uh, they're just they grow. They're the the good mutations overgrow the bad mutations, and that's called natural selection. So the
mhm.
mechanism is natural selection which is based on random mutations. It's a little bit hard to grasp sometimes to think that, but we've had I think it's actually 3.7 billion years to evolve. That's a very long time, and it allows a lot of generations and a lot of mutations.
So I guess what we need to do when we get up in the morning out of bed, we need to be able to plan to deal with random.
Right. But then that's, of course, it's in your children and your offspring that happens, of course. So there's not much you can do about yourself, at least not yet. Oh, there's some interesting things going on with that. I mean, clearly the genome editing, the
Right.
CRISPR, that's pretty fascinating. But then ethics get in there, and we really don't want to edit the gene line. That's considered off limits.
At least for now, I suppose.
Well, that's the other side of that is it's off limits for those who obey the rules, but there are always people who don't obey the rules. And
well, that's why there are rules.
That's right. That's why we have laws and lawyers.
So we're getting it back to what I do. Well, Gary, thank you very much for coming on again.
Oh, you're welcome. I
Keep
enjoy
writing
talking
those
about it.
books, and we'll see you again, hopefully with another interesting topic that I'm sure everybody would like to hear you talk about. So we'll schedule that. Thank you.
Thank you, Bernie.